So just check the audio. I guess that thing's on, right? It's blue. Okay. Guess we're good then. Just take a couple breaths and kind of take a couple minutes. Still a little bit early. Okay. So first thing I always like to do is just kind of give thanks. Um, Meditation is something that's sacred. There's very few times in our lives where we shut out the outside world and go within to look at ourselves. And this is one of those times. No music, no movies, no social media, no distractions. Just us and ourselves trying to become a little bit better than we were yesterday. And so today's topic is starting over. And I think it's a really key topic because if you're trying anything difficult, usually you're going to fail repeatedly at it. And our instinct usually when we fail at something is to either give up or to readjust our goal, which if we want to achieve something high, you can't necessarily do because any goal that you have is going to put quite a lot of pressure on you. So what you usually have to get good at is failing and then starting over. And that's why today's topic is about starting over. Welcome. So yeah, so like I was saying, today's topic's about starting over and how basically any time you plan to accomplish something difficult, you're basically going to fail a lot. And so this implanting this idea of being really good at starting over when you fail or don't achieve something you're trying to achieve is really key because it's inevitable. And I know for myself, there's been many times where I have to start over, and it can be a real point of despair and depression and anger because a lot of times you might put a lot of effort into something. And having to start over would basically mean that your ego might take a hit, for one. But besides that, it takes quite a lot of internal perseverance and strength a lot of times to try to start over. And so if you know it's coming, you can kind of mentally prepare for it. So when you do mess up, or say you're trying to, it could really apply to anything, from having a regular meditation practice to going to the gym. You have to basically become very good at starting over if you want to grow. And so for this meditation, I think I'm going to have us all look at the different things, places, or certain obstacles that we see that we need to start over on. We need to reset, readjust. And so we'll just give a couple of minutes to sit on that. We have a couple more people coming in. All right, welcome. So I was just saying today's topic is starting over, and how usually if you're trying to accomplish anything difficult, you're going to fail and you're going to have to start over. And so getting clear mentally that it's okay to start over, that starting over is going to be part of progressing, part of growing, can take away a lot of mental stress, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt whenever you have to start over. And so we're just going to kind of sit on that topic for a bit and kind of see where it takes us. Okay, so let's just kind of begin. Back straight, head straight. The posture is important because as you sit longer and longer periods of time, if you have bad posture, you can really seriously hurt yourself. I know I've always had a fair amount of back pain, but if I'm conscious about my posture, it can really help a lot. And so as we breathe, try to just breathe into the abdomen. Taking slow, mindful breaths. We start the process of going inside, looking at our mind, emotions, our heart, our just general frame of mind. All these things, whatever's there, we recognize it. And this allows us to go deeper. No judgment, no real effort other than maintaining the observing state. Now is a time to relax from the day, from whatever has been bothering you. Almost always when you're meditating, there's going to be distractions, noises, one sensation or another. And the important thing is to just remember that this is part of the meditation, not a hindrance to it. If there's a belief that there's a hindrance, then every time you try to meditate, you're going to start becoming annoyed because your idea of what meditation is supposed to be like won't fit the reality of what meditation actually is. And so I'm just going to give a couple minutes now to try to find that space of quiet observing so we can kind of work into some deep contemplation. Meditation's amazing because it's really the way to directly address all mental and emotional turmoil. That's why it's so important to spend time to try to master the process of meditation. Imagine any time that we're upset or something's bothering us, just being able to look within and be able to resolve whatever issue is there. That's really the promise of mastering meditation, to be able to obtain that ability to find peace whenever we want to find peace. So once you've found that space, and you're able to get a little bit of silence and just observe, and you feel your mind kind of settling, you can start bringing up the idea of starting over and coming to peace with having to start over in many ways, with many different things. Perhaps you have given up on something that's important to you, and so you're now realizing that it's important to start over. Or if you have a goal that you've recently not met, this would be the time to accept where you are and make a new determination and just observe what that takes internally and how that process works, because what we want to do is become more aware of the process of having to start over. So just that little bit can become a little bit easier, a little bit faster. We can become a little bit more tolerant, resilient. It can be really easy to become overwhelmed at times. So have some compassion for yourself. There's nothing wrong with having to start over. No one is perfect. Except for those that have reached full liberation. But this path is long. And even if you don't believe in there being such a state as full liberation, nonetheless, just taking one step closer to becoming fully self-aware, to gaining some distance between whatever emotional reaction or mental reactions you have is something that's quite priceless in life, because then you can start to see what's true and make decisions accordingly. Try to get in touch with what starting over feels like to you. What that mentally brings up to be addressed. Starting over is difficult, because very often we have to admit to ourselves that we've fallen in some way from our intended goal or path, which takes humility. If you feel any type of physical discomfort from sitting, instead of reacting to the pain or the discomfort or anxiety, try to just take a couple seconds to wait before moving, just to create a little bit of a buffer. So you're aware of the thing, recognizing what reaction it's causing, and then if you have to move, move, or just continue to observe if you can. Being okay with what's uncomfortable is such a big part of growth, to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Because if you're really trying to do very deep spiritual work, I can almost promise you that you're going to be uncomfortable. Because whatever that way you've conditioned yourself to be is going to be threatened by doing deep, insightful work on yourself. So knowing this ahead of time, we can just kind of give ourselves a little bit of loving kindness, a little bit of compassion, knowing that we're trying, and even though that we might struggle or not reach our goal, whatever that might be, we can still continue to persevere. And through perseverance, we'll start to get a little bit closer to whatever that goal is, until eventually we obtain it. Most people are very comfortable in their lives. They live very comfortable lives. There's nothing wrong with that. But But for that individual which chooses to be a spiritual seeker, we must accept that life, in some ways, will be more difficult. Life will be more difficult because you are trying to actively decondition your mind and emotions and to become aware, which is different than the normal way of being in this world. So once again, we're just looking at starting over. In whatever way we need to start over, whether that be a meditation practice, a workout, trying again on improving a relationship, or perhaps even trying to meet more people, make new friends, find that romantic partner or whatever it is that we believe will improve our lives for the better. But with that said, keeping in mind that the spiritual pursuit is ultimately the only way to true happiness, because it is the only way to self-mastery, in which you are not dependent upon external circumstances for your own happiness. And in this sense, the spiritual path is set apart from all other paths. In many ways, we could say a meditation about starting over is a meditation about perseverance. The nature of the mind is to wander, at least the nature of the untrained mind. Knowing this, whenever the mind wanders into some other domain, perhaps either some sort of fear for the future or some sort of fear about the past. We continually bring it back to the breath and to whatever our topic of meditation is, which for today is overcoming, starting over. Starting over because any goal that we set, which is difficult, will eventually lead us to fail, to stray, because if it was something which we were already conditioned to do that came easily, very often is not even worth pursuing, or you already have the results of that pursuit. The things that we avoid doing are often the more difficult things. That's why for the most part, I think almost everybody avoids meditation to one degree or another, even if they believe it's very useful. Which is why moments like this, when everyone comes together to sit and think deeply about their lives and their beliefs and to look at themselves, is really something sacred and beautiful. If you find that by sitting, just trying to maintain any level of focus is too difficult, then just always remember to just focus on the breath and nothing else. The breath is really the original and most simple meditation object we have available to us. Everywhere we go, the breath follows. And by becoming aware of the breath, we become more aware of our mind. You'll soon start to learn that the breath and the mind are very closely connected. But once some level of calm and peace arises, try to focus back to the topic of contemplation, starting over. In order to start over, truly start over, we usually have to forgive ourselves for whichever way in which we've strayed, because a lot of times when something becomes too hard and we do stray, there can be a lot of guilt and shame around having to start over. And so in order to really start over, we have to first address that. We have to forgive ourselves. We have to have compassion for our weaknesses. Otherwise, a state of frustration and anger can take over, and the energy to restart will never happen. Or if it does, it will be just a temporary restart, not really rooted in real conviction real conviction that arises from being able to return to a strength within ourselves, a space of peace and compassion and confidence. To get to that space, we have to just allow whatever that frustration and anger and everything else that keeps us from being able to restart. We have to bring all that to the surface. We have to see it, be with it, forgive it, allow it. And from that, we will have fertile ground to start growing again. There's a very strong prevailing idea, I guess you could call it hedonism within our culture, that if you just get enough pleasure and things that feel good, you'll be happy. Perhaps in some sort of temporary fashion, this is true. If my desire for something I really crave is given to me, then I'm temporarily satiated. In the long run, you'll always need more because there's always that pain, shame, anger, frustration, all these emotions underneath everything. And it's only through being able to be with those feelings, allowing them to pass, and they will pass. This is one of the fundamental Buddhist principles of anicca, which means change. Knowing that when you have an uncomfortable emotion, something which is very painful to you, to know that eventually it will pass, eventually it will change, is wisdom. But to just know this intellectually is one thing, but here we are practicing it. We practice it by just observing. Whatever comes up, as we change our attention and allow for different reactions to happen, we allow for healing as well in that area. The higher your goal and the more that you try to achieve it, the more it hurts when you fail. The more it hurts when you stray from that path that you've set for yourself. So very often when we all set high goals and don't reach them, there can be a very painful reaction. This is why many people don't set any high goals for themselves. Because just to exist without goals can often seem more peaceful and less painful. But in fact, what you want to find is this sort of balance between being able to forgive yourself, to not have shame and guilt, and to continue to strive. And that way you can have the best of both worlds, where you can achieve very lofty goals while also being able to have the love and compassion instead of the frustration and anger if things start to change or not work out how you want them to. And it's kind of this middle path that we strive for. Well, we want to be detached from greed, anger, hatred, and delusion. It's okay to set goals for yourself that help yourself and those around you, that are for the betterment of society. Goals that come from love. But our ability oftentimes to stay on these goals, to stay with them, a lot of the time depends on our ability to start over, to recover from when things don't go as we've planned. You could almost also call starting over as a critical moment. It's the moment where you can waste months or years wallowing in despair, resentment, feelings of worthlessness, or it can be a moment where you forgive, try again, and ultimately reach your goal. So we'll just take 5 more minutes. This meditation. It's okay to be on the spiritual path. It's okay to be someone who's growing and doesn't have it all figured out. Someone who's exerting effort, trying to the best of their ability. We want to recognize how much effort we have put thus far and will continue to put as we become wiser. yourself to relax. Allow yourself to start over in this moment. Every moment we can make the choice to start anew. And so, in any way that you feel like you need to start over, allow yourself the space to do that now. Just take a couple more deep breaths, and with that, you can slowly start to open your eyes, move around a little bit. So I always like to leave the last 15 minutes or so for a topic, question, or just sitting in silence. All of them work for me.
With the topic of starting over, I'm reminded of Sharon Salzberg. I went to see her in Santa Monica.
Mm.
It was an 8-hour sort of retreat, but her message was, you can always begin again.
Mm.
So you're meditating, you drift off, you're distracted, begin again.
Yeah, begin again.
That, in essence, the whole of the teaching of how to meditate is knowing that you're going to begin again, that you can always begin again.
Mm-hmm.
And that in fact you have to keep coming back to this every practice, because you can't choke hold the mind to stay there from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Only by this gentle encouragement.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the starting over thing is a little bit counterintuitive because a lot of times we have to put so much stress, or we do put so much stress on ourselves because starting over comes at such a high price, whether that be like a test or whatever it is. There's one time to perform, and if you don't perform accordingly that one time, then, there's some sort of negative consequence. So we develop this sort of fear response to starting over. But in reality, I mean, it's really one of the, I mean, it seems like even with, what do they call it, like in the big five of personality, they would call it like conscientiousness, or this like ability to like persevere and, what have you. But yeah, it's,
Well, I'm reminded that I couldn't do yoga because I was too strong.
mm,
And when the instructor told me that, I said, "Is that a joke?"
mm-hmm,
He said, "No, this is not a place for your strength to show off,
mm,
but to soften."
mm,
And so it's like you go to the weights to see how much you can lift.
mm-hmm.
When you do yoga, how much you could let go, how much you could be in tune with the moment, and it's not about the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, like all meditation's very like, because you could say yin, like it almost feels very passive compared to everything else, which might be very yang and intense and pushing. And so, you know, it's it's all about finding that balance. I mean, it's definitely. I'm not surprised that most people don't meditate or feel like it's too hard. It's no surprise to me because it's when you're alone, in your own mind and all that programming you've had that's made you successful in one area is now backfiring in the area of just, meditation. It can be very unsettling.
What if, on the occasions you are out, let's say the beach, and you do practice meditation, and that just really fascinates the others? What would you say to really get them to really try it out? I mean, try asking or presenting so many different ways.
Hmm.
Something that you take with you anywhere, anytime.
Yeah. So just to repeat the question, so the thing is, if someone, just because I have a mic on, just if someone, if you're meditating at the beach and someone comes up to you and they're interested in meditation, how do you kind of help to guide them into the world of meditation and spirituality, basically, right?
Mm.
Yeah. I think, the main thing, like, I think is getting them to come to a group because I think it's such a holistic thing usually that being around other people that are also meditating with like a certain mentality has a certain, is probably like the best way to actually have people start making serious progress because it's really a whole lifestyle, right? It's not just even about meditation, but even if they're just interested in meditation, like going to meditation group allows to open up that broader context, I think, to start making changes.
What if, how would you present that in a time when social gathering is kind of a very enigmatic process that we're just really crawling
Hmm.
out of?
Well, I think, first it's usually kind of like to recognize it, right? Like a lot of the time, if there's, some sort of hindrance between why you think people won't do something, like this is kind of just general. It's almost like sales. It's kind of first thing you will usually want to do is recognize it. Like, hey, I know it's COVID and, maybe, a lot of people are still kind of afraid to meet up, but, there's really a lot of benefit to like meditating with a group. And if you don't want to do that, there's also books and there's this and there's that. But man, I've gained so much out of, sitting with others and having conversations face to face, and it's nothing else like it. And if you frame it like that, a lot of times people will kind of be like, oh, wow, okay, I never thought about how important that aspect is. And it can a lot of times motivate people, I think, to actually make the jump. Or if they're like really new and they've never heard about the word meditation, or maybe they've just seen some guided stuff online. Um, I mean, I've always found that like if I feel like someone's being really sincere, I usually just add them on like Facebook or something else, right? I'll just talk to them. Like, hey, check this out. What do you think? What do you feel? And just kind of feel it out for a little bit. And then eventually, maybe they'll want to show up to something. But that's a little bit more effort, obviously, on your part. But, I think like with any sort of human interaction, rapport and friendship goes a long way. So a lot of times it's like the same process of like befriending someone. And the more that you're kind of a friend and the more that you kind of click, the more likely they are to kind of listen to you and want to do other stuff, you know, maybe get more into meditation or whatever. You can share then, right, back and forth with them. And that's always kind of a cool process. Yeah.
It brings me to the question. I love yoga and I love Buddhism. Is there any connection?
between yoga and Buddhism. I guess it means if you mean like yoga as in like Shiva Sutras yoga, are you talking about yoga as in stretching, which most of it is yoga as in stretching, right? So you wouldn't really have a conflict on that level because it's not really a philosophical thing. It's more like, right, you're trying to relax and it has certain benefits, and it is usually encompassed within a philosophy. But I think for people like they really want to get into Buddhism and they already have some experience with maybe the philosophy of yoga, right, which is basically like Hinduism, more or less. Um, I think that if they're serious, I always say like a meditation retreat is always like kind of the best thing. But if that's too much of a commitment, then the thing that I think appeals to a lot of people about Buddhism is it's very much a simplified version that's more practical in some ways, right? Like you're kind of choosing to, the Eightfold Path, Four Noble Truths, and being able to like just sit and meditate with other people. There's not a lot of, even though there is an esoteric side to Buddhism, in some ways it's like just teaches you, okay, you're suffering. What's the fastest way you can not suffer and to gain control of your own mind? And I think explaining it that way a lot of times can move people slightly over to the Buddhist side. Um, you know, but I guess when it comes to like the philosophy, as I'm sure, as I know, yoga is so broad. True yoga.
I wonder if it could be a coincidence that both are eight-limbed paths.
Yeah.
But in AA, we always say that because the Buddha taught the Noble Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, he really taught the first 12-step program.
I like that, yeah. So since the Buddha taught the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, it's the first 12-step program. I like that, yeah.
But actually, my question was more, are there those other limbs that could contribute to the Buddhist practice of meditation?
Well, even beyond those limbs, I really think almost anything people gravitate towards that really speaks to them has value. Like I wouldn't even say I think a study of, in order to really understand even Buddhism, I believe you really do have to have some sort of background or understanding of Hinduism as well. Because a lot of people I find attribute a lot of things to just Buddhism that also, that also was heavily influenced by Hinduism. And even if it wasn't, even if it's like kind of like the Hinduism now, because Hinduism obviously has changed a lot, right, over the years. And so, you have a huge amount of people that have also tried to seek liberation. And their experiences and their voices and their insights, I think, are really valuable. Even for me, I study even like the Christian stuff, right? And, the book Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross was really influential for me, in kind of understanding meditation in a broader context, because he goes through like the dark night of the senses, where it's like about freeing yourself from certain cravings. And then he talked about like the dark night of the soul, which he basically said was equal to like you're still suckling from the mother and now you're a child and the mother puts you down and now you have to kind of like learn to survive on your own. And it just being a completely different dimension, a much more committed dimension that most people never get to. And I just found that like to be really insightful. And he breaks down all the different aspects of that. And that allowed me to understand like even a lot of the Buddhist stuff in a deeper way. Because my kind of thing is like, the culture and time tend to kind of dilute everything. And so the closer you can kind of get to the source, and then I really do believe that, in karma and that people having certain lineages throughout time as well. So I think they're naturally going to be drawn towards certain things. But I think next to Buddhism, Hinduism is probably the next best thing to study in a way. And then after that, there's certain Christian stuff that I think is really useful. And then obviously like even a lot of stuff that's not religious, a lot of secular or even just non-denominational things have been hugely influential for me. Like I think I talked about maybe a number of times with Dr. David R. Hawkins and his book like Letting Go and certain stuff like that that's not necessarily religious. But that comparative religion approach allows you to get out of what I believe is kind of mostly toxic, which is religious dogma. I think any time that you don't have direct experience of something, and then there's all this kind of like very strong conviction around it, you're more likely than not to be misconstruing it, or it ends up becoming kind of a bit of an ego trip where it's just another belief system that's eventually going to have to be dissolved in order for you to directly experience a very non-verbal, non-dual truth at the end of the day. But with that also said, I mean, I'm also a big believer in understanding philosophy, because I think without, yeah, I think, well, I guess what's not recognized usually is that everyone has to have a philosophy. You really can't act without a philosophy in the world, you know, and most people are just unconscious about the philosophy they're holding. And so actively getting a good framework or a good philosophy about life and what you want life to be and what you're pursuing, right, is we're going to be able to draw a lot of meaning from that. And so going through that stage of um, going through that stage of hashing out what you believe and having it evolve is really a big part of the spiritual path in my view. And sometimes people try to go straight to like the non-dual, I'm not thinking, no meditation, I don't want to talk philosophy. And it's all coming from a place of really actually having a negative philosophy that's overpowering everything, so there's not able to have a dialogue at all. And I find that to be really just as toxic as having a dogma, you know? And that's where it gets a little bit kind of this weird irony almost sometimes, right? Yeah. Advaita Vedanta changed a lot because Adi Shankara, I believe his name was, you know, kind of actually incorporated a lot of even like what, because, you know, like they basically Advaita Vedanta, which is kind of more the stuff that I got into. I can't remember the exact year when that really started, but a lot of people accused him of basically stealing stuff from Buddhism, because they were talking a lot more about, um, what was the main thing? There being no self was like a really big concept in that, which is kind of like the same as anatta. But they also have like a Brahma, but Brahma as in like Brahma being the highest level of gods, which we also talk about in Buddhism. But when they talk about Brahma, it's basically like, you know, whenever anyone describes anything with any philosophy as it being indescribable, beyond perception, like you can't kind of dice that up into different things. Like all you're talking about the same thing at that point. And if you call it Brahma or you call it God, you call it whatever, but you give it the same attributes of being indefinable, beyond comprehension, and all this sort of stuff, you're talking about the same thing as far as I can discern. And so it becomes just kind of devolves a lot of times into semantics because of that. And and I think like a lot of the stuff with, I guess, how Hinduism has changed as it made us how far, you know, like, because, you know, I think a lot of times it's not even, I kind of believe there's always enlightened teachers and then a bunch of deluded people that are constantly manipulating stuff. And sometimes it's a little bit more clear and sometimes it's less clear. Because I really do believe, like, say, the ancient Vedas and maybe the people who understood that as it was meant to be understood were basically enlightened beings. And then I think it just kind of, you know, people start misconstruing stuff. And then you have like this whole sort of caste system even, which is the main thing that Hindus, Buddhists always talk about, kind of down about Hinduism is like the caste system and stuff. But they've had their own struggles with caste and trying to free themselves from that and having reinterpretations. And even though I don't think it's still taken, you know, in India as a whole, like, there is still a lot of that stuff going on. I mean, you do see people kind of starting to move away from that, starting to get a little bit more into a form of Hinduism that I think jives a little bit more with Advaita Vedanta. But you also have like a lot of like deity worship and stuff, which obviously you don't really get into so much with Buddhism. So there's definitely like things that are completely different. But I mean, it also matters on how esoteric or fundamental you get. Like if we're talking about like the three different paths where you have like karma yoga, which would basically be more like meditation for the most part. Karma yoga as in just using actions to retire liberation. Then you have more devotion, which would be like bhakti. And then also to like jhana yoga, which would be more like the philosophy kind of wing. And so a lot of these things like have categorizations that are quite useful, especially if you're not used to them. And then it's just a matter of, you know, are they using these categorizations in to explain their direct experience, or is it purely a dogmatic philosophical thing that they're trying to explain? In which case, usually it doesn't carry much real wisdom. And so, I mean, like even when it came to like a lot of the non-dual, non-self stuff, a lot of that I really understood more from the Advaita Vedanta stuff before I even came to Buddhism, which made Buddhism a lot easier. But all that stuff did come a little bit later. But like I said, I think the Vedas and stuff kind of already had it figured out. But then it's like, it's a mix. And a lot of this stuff, because it's all ancient stuff, there's always the orthodoxy around what they like Hindus would believe, and then what a lot of Buddhists say, and then, so I mean, unless you get a degree in it, there's just so much stuff. But for the most part, um, I think there's something to just once you gain like an intuitive understanding of what it is that you're looking for, or like what is spirituality, and like what does that space feel like, and you can kind of, I do think, tell a lot of times where certain teachers are coming from, um, and that can allow for greater insights, because the mind is so good at tricking us, right? And defining some sort of belief or some sort of way of framing something, and then thinking we understand it, like even meditation, or even ourselves, right? Like, oh, I know who I am, right? And then it's like, wait a second, there's like a million layers deeper than this than I thought there was. And just sometimes a little tweak in languaging can allow you to just go a little bit deeper. And but then also too, you get the other people that argue the opposite, which is like people just become massively confused all the time. So a lot of people that aren't philosophically inclined study multiple traditions. They say this tradition says this, and this one's telling me to meditate, and then I go to the Christian side, and they're telling me to pray all the time. And like, what's right? And a lot of times I just find that it's because it's not rooted in anything subjective. It's still like an objective philosophy. So even when you're meditating, it could be, I think, equal to sort of prayer. And if you study like the desert monks or people that actually lived an ascetic sort of monastic lifestyle, they're going to talk about prayer almost as if it's a meditation pretty much. And so at that point you can kind of, but then you have a lot of people too that just say like believe in Jesus and you can do whatever. And then, I mean, that stuff I think is a little bit farther away personally, but I respect everyone's ability to be where they're at. And I've had to come to kind of terms with the fact that, people are very different places philosophically. So with that said, I think Buddhism is kind of cool because it tends to be simpler. It tends to be more just about meditation, at least kind of what it's become in the West. It's actually kind of funny when you go to Asia and everyone's praying to Buddha or praying to like, the Bodhi tree or whatever it is. It's a little bit different, but I mean, as far as I think real pure Buddhism, when you read the suttas and stuff, it's really about meditation and going deeper and deeper in meditation. So, yeah. Did I go a little bit over, 4 or 5 minutes. Anyway, so I always like to just, once again recognize how wonderful it is that you all come here and are willing to look inside and spend time. And I can't tell you how beautiful I think that is, and how amazing. And just thank you, also to everyone watching online. And thank you for being here with me. Hope to see you next week.